Hello space fans, welcome to Space Command. My name's Brian and we're going to be covering several developments in space news this week. It's been a busy week, so the things we're going to talk about are NASA's Artemis program with the SLS rocket and the Orion spacecraft, and President Trump's directive to return the humans to the moon as part of the Artemis program. Next, we're going to talk about the crew for the International Space Station, which is getting ready to change in a few months. Also, we'll have updates on the commercial crew program, Spacex, and Boeing. And we're going to talk about President Trump's Space Force, the new 6th branch of the U.S. military, and so we'll talk about that. First, I do want to mention it has been 3,038 days since we've been able to launch American astronauts on American spacecraft to space. We haven't been able to do that since 2011, when the Space Shuttle Atlantis landed for the last time and is now on display at the Kennedy Space Center. Since that time, we've had to send our astronauts to space on Russian Soyuz capsules, and they charge us $86 million per seat. $86 million per seat. Well, let's talk about some space weather. On Mars today, the date is 2568. It's Sol number 2568. And the weather is sunny. It's always sunny on Mars. The high temperature today is negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The low is negative 112 degrees Fahrenheit. And the sunrise this morning was at 5:51. The sunset will be this evening at 5:33. And the ultraviolet radiation index is moderate, which is not too good. So you're going to want to make sure you have some significant sunscreen and some sunglasses. And I would definitely recommend, at negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit, some warm clothes and a coat for sure if you're going out today on Mars. So, alright, what else is going on with space weather? The moon is in the waxing phase. That's the phase of the moon today. And we are currently in the middle of a meteor shower tonight. So if you're out tonight, you might want to look up and check that out. It's called the Torrid meteor shower, and tonight should be some great visibility to see the moon, to see the meteor shower, that is, because of the moon being in the waxing phase. And the reason that is because the light pollution from the moon is quite a bit less when it's in its waxing phase. So you should be able to see the meteors a whole lot better. These meteors are what's left behind by Encke's comet. So if you're out tonight, like I said, take a look up at the sky and see if you see any meteors. That should be a real treat. Alright, well, in space news this week, on Wednesday, October 30th, during an annual meeting of the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group, NASA scientists John Connolly and Nikki Workhauser divulged some interesting details involving the 2024 upcoming manned mission to the moon as part of the Artemis program. The Artemis program, where did we get that term, Artemis? What does that mean? Well, Artemis is a Greek goddess, and if you remember, the Apollo program went to the moon, and Apollo was a Greek god. Artemis is Apollo's twin sister. And so we are now in a new race to the moon, and we've called it Artemis, fittingly. So that's where the term Artemis came from. The scientists stated that the next 2 astronauts on the moon are going to stay there on the lunar surface for 6.5 days, completing multiple experiments. Now, 6.5 days is twice as long as what the Apollo astronauts endured. So that's a pretty significant thing. Further statements included the use of an unpressurized lunar rover, which the astronauts will be able to remotely operate. And looking beyond 2024, the scientists describe sending crews of up to 4 astronauts to the lunar surface for stays of up to 14 days on the surface of the moon. And that's before 2030. And the key word there is before 2030. So that's pretty exciting, the timeline that these scientists are laying out for the exploration of the moon. Very exciting. All right. Also on Wednesday, October 30th, NASA announced that astronaut Chris Cassidy is going to be the next commander on the International Space Station. As Expedition 63 gets underway next April. So that's going to launch in April, and Cassidy and his crewmates, Russian cosmonauts Nikolai Tikhonov and Andrei Babkin. Did I pretty much butcher those names? I think I did. That's okay. They will serve aboard the space station until October 2020. So this is going to be Cassidy's 3rd space flight, and he previously flew aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour for STS-127, and that mission was in 2009. He served as the space station. He served on the space station previously as part of Expeditions 35 and 36. Cassidy is a Navy SEAL, and he has extensive experience with prior spacewalks. He has spent a total of 182 days in space, and he has accumulated 31 hours spacewalking. So like I said, he definitely has extensive expertise and experience with doing spacewalks outside of the International Space Station. So you heard me mention that the launch for the next crew is in April, and apparently NASA is going to continue its practice of purchasing Cassidy's transportation to the International Space Station aboard a Russian Soyuz capsule for $86 million. Now NASA and all of America continue to wait for the commercial crew program to begin transporting American astronauts to space on American spacecraft from U.S. soil. Now SpaceX and Boeing continue to complete tests on the Crew Dragon capsule and Boeing CST-100 Starliner crew capsule ahead of their first successful manned launches. And unfortunately, those launches have been pushed back to sometime next year in 2020. So I guess what NASA is doing is they're covering all their bases by purchasing this seat from Russia on the Soyuz capsule for April, in case SpaceX and Boeing are still not ready to transport astronauts to the space station. Hopefully that is not the case. Do you think Russia will give us a refund of that $86 million if we don't need to send Cassidy on the Soyuz capsule? I kind of doubt it. We'll find out. All right. Well, speaking of the commercial crew program, let's check in with SpaceX and Boeing and see where we're at on the testing phases for the Crew Dragon and the Starliner capsules that are proposed to take the astronauts to space. Tomorrow, November 2nd, in Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida, SpaceX will be conducting a test of the Crew Dragon on the test stand, and it's going to be a static fire test on the Super Draco engines. And of course, you know, this is uncrewed, so there won't be anybody on board. And what I mean by a static test on the test stand is they're going to take the Crew Dragon and mount it on this test stand, attach it to the test stand, and they're going to fire up the Super Draco engines and make sure that they're performing up to par, performing correctly. So they're going to do that. And the reason that this test is so important is, if you remember, last April, SpaceX tried to do the exact same test, and a catastrophic anomaly happened on the test stand, and that uncrewed Dragon capsule exploded. And that was due to some hypergolic valve malfunctions. So that put the program pretty significantly behind schedule because they had to do a whole investigation and track down exactly what the problem was, and why the Crew Dragon ended up exploding there on the test stand. And they did find the problem. It was a faulty valve with the hypergolic Super Draco engines and the hypergolic fuel that powers those engines. So they have identified the problem. They re-engineered the valves, so it's a different valve system. So they're ready to go. They're ready to go now. And so we should be good to go. Tomorrow, November 2nd, we'll all be watching SpaceX and covering that launch, or that test on the test stand. So that'll be pretty exciting. Let's see. Then, in mid-December, we should have an uncrewed in-flight abort test by SpaceX's Crew Dragon. And an in-flight abort test, what that means is, and that's critical to this first test tomorrow with the Super Draco engines, because that's what the in-flight abort test is all about. The Falcon 9 rocket is going to launch, and then they're going to simulate some kind of anomaly with the Falcon 9 rocket to where the Crew Dragon has to separate in an emergency situation and fire up those Super Draco engines on the Crew Dragon, and it will safely rocket away from the Falcon 9 and take the astronauts to safety. And then the parachutes will deploy, and then it'll splash down safely, delivering the astronauts back to Earth. So that's why these tests are so very important. And now that test in mid-December will also be uncrewed. There won't be anybody on board. It's just a test, and we want to make sure those systems are working correctly. Now, speaking of the parachutes, that's the third critical test that SpaceX needs to complete before they're ready for the Demo 2 mission, where they actually take astronauts to space. They've had some trouble with the parachutes in the past. Basically, the trouble they're having is just inconsistent results with the deployment of those parachutes. So they need to do 10 successful parachute tests here between now and January to make sure that their parachutes are up to par and ready to go. So that is the third condition that they need to complete before they'll be ready for the Demo 2 mission. Now, the Demo 2 mission is going to take astronauts Bob Behnken, they're NASA astronauts, and Doug Hurley to the International Space Station and then return them. So that's a pretty good deal, and we're pretty excited about that. So that's what's going on with SpaceX and the Crew Dragon and what they have left to accomplish before they can take Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to space. What's going on with the Boeing CST-100 Starliner? They are significantly behind SpaceX on these tests for their capsule. They're just now getting ready to do the Demo 1. Do you remember I mentioned SpaceX already completed the Demo 1 mission back in March? The Demo 1 mission is where they launch an uncrewed capsule to the International Space Station, remotely dock with the space station, and then return here to the planet. And so SpaceX successfully completed their test back in March. Now it's Boeing's turn to do theirs. That's how far behind that SpaceX Boeing is. They're just now doing their Demo 1 test, uncrewed. And so that date has been set for December 17th. And if all goes as planned, December 17th we'll have the CST-100 Starliner to the International Space Station for that test. All right. Now for some fun news. Hey, next time that you're visiting the International Space Station, you can have a freshly baked cookie, a chocolate chip cookie. Isn't that awesome? Well, forget the freeze-dried space grub. Astronauts are about to receive a ZeroG oven on their next delivery. The astronauts will be able to throw some cookie dough into this ZeroG test oven for some freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. The experiment explores the ability of making fresh baked goods for space travelers. This ZeroG oven was developed by a New York couple, Ian and Jordana Fichtenbaum, with the help from Texas-based company NanoRacks. NanoRacks is who designed and built the oven. And let's see, the cookie dough was provided by the hotel chain DoubleTree. So the downside is that the ZeroG oven only bakes one cookie at a time. One cookie at a time. But hey, nobody's complaining about that. Hey, it's a freshly baked chocolate chip cookie in space, right? Well, the astronauts are just going to be happy to try the oven out, and especially try out those chocolate chip cookies. The oven's going to launch tomorrow, November 2nd, via the Commercial Resupply Program, and that's the Cygnus cargo capsule, which is built by Northrop Grumman, and it's going to launch on a Northrop Grumman Antares rocket from Virginia. So that's tomorrow. So tune in for some coverage of the launch of the Cygnus spacecraft capsule to the International Space Station to deliver this ZeroG oven. All right. All right. Well, what else is going on? Let's talk about the Space Force, right? The sixth branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. President Trump proposed this new branch of the Armed Forces, and it's something I believe we desperately need to have in place. The first two candidates for integration into the Space Force are the X-37B secret space planes that Boeing built, and I covered those secret space planes in a previous video, so you might check that out. The X-37B recently landed Sunday, October 27th, after record-breaking 780 days in orbit. That's right, it's been up there for 780 days. This is Orbital Test Vehicle 5, and it landed at the Shuttle Landing Facility of NASA's Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida. It originally launched on a Falcon 9 rocket on September 7th, 2017. The previous record for the space plane was 718 days in orbit, and that was set by OTV-4 mission in May of 2017. So, yeah, 780 days in orbit. What do you think that space plane was doing up there in orbit for 780 days? We do not know. I don't know what it was doing up there. The mission is classified, so they're not telling anybody what that space plane was doing up there for 780 days. But we can only imagine, right? Now, these two secret space planes are operated by the U.S. Air Force, and the Air Force Chief of Staff, General Goldfein, said in a statement that the sky is no longer the limit for the Air Force with these two new space planes, and if Congress approves the U.S. Space Force, these two secret X-37B space planes will be included in the Space Force. So that's pretty exciting. And of course, you know, they're completely reusable. They're unmanned. I guess just think of them as drones. They're unmanned drones that can reach orbit and stay up there for an unlimited period of time. And these X-37B spaceplanes were developed by NASA back in 1999. So that's quite a while back. They've had quite a long time to develop these craft and perfect their operations. I'm going to put up an image of the X-37B spaceplane here in a minute, and you could take a look at that. They are 29 feet long. They're 9.5 feet tall. They have a wingspan which is 15 feet wide. The payload bay is 7 feet long and 4 feet wide. That's about the size of a pickup truck bed. So not really too big, the payload bay. The very first mission for them launched April 2010, and the first 4 missions were launched on an Atlas V rocket. So obviously they can also launch on a Falcon 9 rocket. So that's pretty exciting stuff. I think it's critical that we have these X-37B spaceplanes as part of the Space Force up there in space. The reason why I think it's so critical, well, look at some recent things that have happened just last week. North Korea launched 2 ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan. Russia reportedly fired a Bulava missile from the Prince Vladimir submarine into the North Atlantic as a test. Now, if we had these X-37B spaceplanes up in space and they were in orbit and they had the capability of some type of laser weapon or something, they could have destroyed those missiles before they even landed. So that's why it's critical that we have these X-37B spaceplanes as part of the Space Force. So that's pretty exciting. It is. Well, some other exciting news, and finally, NASA has invited Space Command to apply for a press pass or a social media pass to NASA's Kennedy Space Center on December 4th, 2019 to experience and document the launch of the Spacex CRS-19 mission. And the Spacex CRS-19 mission will launch a cargo Dragon capsule on top of a Falcon 9 rocket to deliver supplies to the International Space Station. This is all part of the commercial resupply mission. So with help from your financial support, we'll be able to fly out to Florida and secure accommodations for a few days and then return home and put together a broadcast documenting the experience for you. And so we want to thank our Patreon supporters and other supporters, and with your help we'll be able to fly out there to Florida and bring that broadcast to you. So that'll be pretty exciting, and I want to thank you for your support. So if you like this video, click like, and if you'd like to see more videos like this one, click subscribe. All right, until next time, thank you and goodbye.